There's a country most people couldn't find on a map if their life depended on it. A nation so small, so overlooked, that it barely registers in global conversations. Yet right now, at this very moment, this forgotten corner of South America is quietly positioning itself to become one of the wealthiest places on Earth by 2030. Not through technology, not through manufacturing, but through something far more powerful, far more dangerous, and far more coveted than almost anything else on the planet. This is the story of Guyana, a country of just 800,000 people that's about to play a game reserved for giants. And what makes this story absolutely fascinating isn't just the astronomical wealth that's coming. It's the fact that everything could still fall apart. Because history has shown us time and time again that sudden wealth doesn't guarantee success. It often guarantees the opposite. And Guyana knows this. They've watched their neighbors make catastrophic mistakes. They've seen empires rise and fall on the very thing they've just discovered. The question isn't whether Guyana will get rich. That's already happening at a pace that defies belief. The real question is whether they can survive their own success. Let me put this into perspective. In 2015, Guyana was one of the poorest countries in South America. Their economy was struggling. Political tensions were tearing the nation apart. The average person was earning just over $5,000 a year. There was no indication, no sign, no hint that anything was about to change. And then off the coast, buried beneath the ocean floor, someone found it. Oil. But not just any oil. We're talking about reserves so massive, so abundant that it would make Guyana on a per capita basis richer in oil than Kuwait. Let that sink in for a moment. Kuwait, a nation that has been synonymous with oil wealth for generations. And Guyana, this tiny forgotten country, now has more oil per person than they do. Since that discovery, Guyana's economy hasn't just grown, it's exploded. In 2024 alone, their economy expanded by over 43%. Not over a decade, not over 5 years, in one single year. To put that in context, most developed nations celebrate if they hit 3% growth. Guyana is growing at a rate 14 times faster than that. International oil companies have poured billions of dollars into the country. The skyline is changing. Infrastructure that seemed impossible just a few years ago is now being built at breakneck speed. And by 2030, if current projections hold, Guyana could have a GDP per capita that rivals some of the wealthiest nations on Earth. It sounds like a miracle. It sounds like the ultimate success story. But here's where things get complicated. Before we go further into this story, I need your help. We're on a mission to reach 10,000 subscribers, and honestly, we can't do it without you. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I do, hit that subscribe button right now. And here's the thing, I want to know what you think. Should Guyana be worried about their neighbor Venezuela? Do you think they can avoid the resource curse? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I read every single one and your perspective matters. Now let's get back to the story because what comes next is where things get really interesting. There's a term economists use called the resource curse, and it's one of the most tragic phenomena in modern economics. Countries that discover massive natural resources, oil, diamonds, gold, should theoretically prosper beyond measure. But the opposite often happens. These nations experience corruption, political instability, economic collapse, and widespread suffering. We've seen it play out in Venezuela, a country that should be one of the richest in the world, but instead has become a humanitarian disaster. We've seen it in Nigeria, in the Congo, in countless other nations, where the discovery of wealth became a curse rather than a blessing. And the reason is simple. When money floods into a country faster than institutions can handle it, everything breaks down. Guyana is staring down this exact threat right now. The oil money is coming in faster than anyone anticipated, and with it comes a series of dangers that could unravel everything. First, there's the issue of corruption. When billions of dollars start flowing, the temptation for politicians, officials, and business leaders to skim off the top becomes overwhelming. History shows us that even well-intentioned governments struggle to resist. Then there's the problem of inequality. Oil wealth rarely distributes evenly. It tends to concentrate in the hands of a few, while the majority of the population sees little to no benefit. This creates resentment, social unrest, and in extreme cases, violence. But perhaps the most insidious threat is something called Dutch disease. It's an economic phenomenon where massive resource revenues cause a nation's currency to appreciate so much that it destroys other sectors of the economy. Suddenly, agriculture becomes unprofitable. Manufacturing can't compete internationally. Tourism collapses, and the entire economy becomes dangerously dependent on a single commodity. And when that commodity's price inevitably crashes, the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. Venezuela is the textbook example of this disaster. They had more oil than almost any country on earth. They should have been an economic powerhouse. Instead, their over-reliance on oil, combined with corruption and mismanagement, led to hyperinflation, mass emigration, and societal collapse. Guyana's leaders know this story. They've watched it unfold right next door, and they're terrified of repeating it. So the question becomes, what are they doing differently? How is Guyana planning to avoid the fate that has claimed so many other resource-rich nations? Their strategy centers on one critical tool, a sovereign wealth fund. This isn't a new idea. Norway did it decades ago with their North Sea oil, and today they have over $1.4 trillion in assets. The concept is elegant in its simplicity. Instead of spending all the oil revenue immediately, you invest a significant portion of it. You build a massive financial cushion that generates returns year after year, long after the oil runs out. It transforms temporary resource wealth into permanent financial security. Guyana is modeling their fund after Norway's success, with strict rules about how much can be withdrawn each year and how the money must be invested. If they can stick to this plan, if they can resist the political pressure to spend everything now, they could set up future generations for unprecedented prosperity. But the Sovereign Wealth Fund is just one piece of the puzzle. Guyana is also making a conscious effort to diversify their economy. They're pouring money into agriculture, into education, into infrastructure that benefits sectors beyond oil. They're building roads, upgrading ports, and investing in power generation. In fact, one of their most ambitious projects is a 300-megawatt natural gas plant combined with 2 hydroelectric facilities. These aren't just about providing electricity to major cities. They're about bringing reliable power to remote communities that have never had it before. Because here's what Guyana understands: oil won't last forever. At some point, decades from now, the wells will run dry or the world will move away from fossil fuels. And when that happens, Guyana needs to have built an economy that can stand on its own. They're also investing heavily in education and vocational training. They want their citizens equipped with skills that go beyond oil extraction. They want a workforce that can compete globally in technology, in services, in industries that don't exist yet. This is the long game. This is how you turn a temporary windfall into lasting prosperity. But implementing these plans is easier said than done. Corruption is already creeping in. There are reports of mismanagement, of contracts being awarded to political allies, of money disappearing before it reaches its intended destination. The government is walking a tightrope, trying to move fast enough to capitalize on the oil boom while also building the institutions necessary to manage it responsibly. And every day, the pressure mounts. But even if Guyana manages to avoid the resource curse, even if they successfully diversify their economy and build a sovereign wealth fund that rivals Norway's, they still face another threat, one that doesn't come from within, one that could derail everything in a matter of days: Venezuela. The tension between Guyana and Venezuela has been simmering for over a century, but it's never been as dangerous as it is right now. At the heart of the conflict is a region called Essequibo. It's a massive territory that makes up roughly 70% of Guyana's land mass. And it's not just any land. It's resource-rich, strategically important, and sitting right on top of some of the offshore oil deposits that have made Guyana so wealthy. Venezuela has claimed this territory for generations, arguing that borders drawn during the colonial era were unjust and should be redrawn. For most of modern history, this was a diplomatic dispute, tense but manageable. However, everything changed when Guyana struck oil. In December 2023, Venezuela held a referendum on annexing Essequibo. Now, whether the Venezuelan people actually supported this move is highly questionable given the Maduro government's track record with democratic processes. But regardless of the legitimacy of the vote, the message was clear. Venezuela was willing to escalate, and they backed up that message with action. Military buildups along the border, troop deployments, joint exercises. This wasn't posturing, this was preparation. Venezuela, a country drowning in its own economic crisis, saw Guyana's oil wealth and decided they wanted a piece of it. Or more accurately, they wanted all of it. Guyana found itself in an impossible position. They're a country of 800,000 people with a small military that couldn't hope to stand against Venezuela's armed forces in a conventional conflict. So they did what any small nation facing an existential threat would do. They turned to international law and international allies. Guyana brought the dispute to the International Court of Justice, hoping that legal mechanisms could resolve what military force could not. But Venezuela refused to recognize the court's jurisdiction. They dismissed the proceedings, essentially saying that they would not be bound by any ruling that went against them. This left Guyana dangerously exposed. And that's where the United States entered the picture. American officials made it clear that they supported Guyana's sovereignty and territorial integrity. They conducted joint military exercises with Guyana. They increased their naval presence in the region. The message to Venezuela was unmistakable. If you invade Guyana, you're not just dealing with a small South American nation. You're dealing with the United States. This transformed a regional border dispute into a potential flashpoint for great power conflict. Because Venezuela isn't without allies either. Russia conducted joint military exercises with Venezuela in 2023. China has extended billions of dollars in loans to the Maduro regime. Both nations have geopolitical reasons for supporting Venezuela and challenging American influence in the region. What started as a territorial dispute over a colonial-era border has become a proxy battleground for global powers. And Guyana sits right in the middle of it. One miscalculation, one border skirmish that spirals out of control, and the entire situation could explode into something far larger and far more devastating. But Guyana isn't sitting idle. They've used their newfound oil wealth strategically, strengthening ties with other Caribbean nations, building a network of regional allies, and isolating Venezuela diplomatically. They've increased defense spending, modernized their military, and improved their intelligence capabilities. They know they can't match Venezuela's military strength, but they can make any potential invasion costly enough to deter it. And they're banking on international pressure, particularly from the United States, to keep Venezuela in check. The stakes couldn't be higher. If Venezuela invades, Guyana's economic transformation ends overnight. The oil companies flee. The investments dry up. The dream of becoming one of the world's wealthiest nations per capita vanishes. But if Guyana can hold the line, if they can maintain their territorial integrity while also managing their oil wealth responsibly, they become something truly remarkable. They become a small nation that punched far above its weight. A country that not only survived its own success but thrived because of it. And that's where we arrive at the most interesting part of this entire story. If Guyana can navigate these next 5 to 10 years successfully, they won't just be wealthy. They'll be influential. Think about Qatar. It's a tiny nation in the Middle East with a population smaller than many cities. But because of their wealth, their strategic positioning, and their diplomatic maneuvering, they wield outsized influence on the global stage. They host major international events. They mediate conflicts. They shape regional politics in ways that nations 10 times their size cannot. Guyana could become the Qatar of South America. Imagine a scenario where Guyana's sovereign wealth fund grows to hundreds of billions of dollars, where their investments span continents and industries, where they become a major player in Caribbean and South American politics, mediating disputes, funding development projects, and using their wealth as leverage to shape regional policy. It sounds ambitious, maybe even far-fetched, but it's entirely possible. The pieces are already in motion. The oil is flowing. The money is coming in. The infrastructure is being built. The question is whether they can hold it all together long enough to make it work. Because here's the thing about sudden wealth. It reveals character. It exposes weaknesses. It tests institutions in ways that nothing else can. Some nations rise to the challenge. They build strong governance, resist corruption, and use their resources to lift up their entire population. Other nations crumble. They squander their wealth, fall into authoritarianism, and leave their citizens worse off than before. Guyana is at that crossroads right now. Every decision they make over the next 5 years will determine which path they take. And the world is watching. Economists are studying their sovereign wealth fund. Political scientists are analyzing their governance structures. Military strategists are monitoring the situation with Venezuela. Because Guyana isn't just a story about one small nation. It's a test case for whether resource wealth can be managed successfully in the 21st century. It's a question of whether good planning, international support, and strong institutions can overcome the resource curse that has destroyed so many others. The data we have so far is promising but incomplete. Guyana's economy is growing at rates that seem almost impossible. Their government, despite challenges, has taken concrete steps to avoid the mistakes of their neighbors. They've built alliances, invested in diversification, and established mechanisms to protect their wealth for future generations. But they're also facing corruption allegations, diplomatic threats, and the enormous pressure that comes with managing billions of dollars in a country that had almost nothing just a decade ago. So will Guyana win the 2030s? Will they become the success story that defies the resource curse and emerges as a prosperous, stable, influential nation? Or will they become another cautionary tale of squandered potential and missed opportunities? The answer lies in the decisions being made right now. In government offices in Georgetown, in boardrooms of international oil companies, in military headquarters in Caracas and Washington. The next 5 years will tell us everything we need to know. What's certain is this: Guyana's story is one of the most compelling geopolitical dramas unfolding in the world today. It has everything: sudden wealth, international intrigue, historical grievances, great power politics, and the fundamental question of whether a small nation can chart its own destiny in a world dominated by larger forces. And unlike so many stories we cover, this one is happening right now. The outcome is still undecided. The final chapter hasn't been written. Guyana stands at the edge of extraordinary prosperity or devastating failure, and the entire world will learn from whatever happens next. Because if they succeed, they'll prove that smart governance and strategic planning can turn natural resources into genuine national wealth. They'll show that small nations can compete on the global stage and win. They'll become a model for every other developing nation sitting on untapped resources. But if they fail, they'll serve as yet another reminder of how quickly fortunes can reverse and how dangerous sudden wealth can be without the institutions to manage it. Either way, Guyana's next chapter will be one for the history books, and we'll be watching every moment of it unfold.